Okay, so once again, our series of the whole year is sponsored. Firstly, Lilu Nishmas Avram ben Yoni Yaakov and also Almog ben Yigal. Tonight, we have a special sponsorship by Daniel Needham, who's here with us on the call. And he tells me his father is does listen to the recordings as well, which is very beautiful. And that is for the upcoming Yortzeit of him that him and Yael Schlagman have for their brother Binyamin Yehoshua Benji Needham, Binyamin Yehoshua ben Amnon and Faye. And the Neshama should have an Aliyah, a real Gibor Yisrael, one of the Kadoshim, a soldier who died defending Am Yisrael. And it's a real privilege tonight, in addition to the family connection, of course, that I have, Yael being my first cousin. But in addition to that, it's a privilege for us to be able to dedicate tonight's share in his memory. Okay, we are going to get going at the bottom of page 30. So, what we said was last time we discussed how we're going to look forward and we're going to use laughter. And laughter as an example of that transition. It's the expression of that transition from that challenging phase into that phase of deliverance, into that phase of that joy that we've actually built ourselves, and it's a much deeper level than the original ecstasy. Anthony, cue the joke so that you can introduce this.
What joke?
Oh, have you got a joke for us, Anthony?
I didn't know I was supposed to prepare one.
You always have a joke up your sleeve.
How many people does it take to defend Paris?
No idea. Go on.
No, nobody knows. They've never tried.
To defend Paris?
Yeah, nobody knows. They've never tried.
I didn't get that one.
Oh, did you get my question on the Cedra, by the way, last week?
Yes, I did. I did
Hmm?
not now, though.
No, no, no. As long as you got it,
Okay.
I'll think of another joke to end with.
All
Then,
right,
if you
you'll
think
think
of
of
that
another
one.
joke. So, okay. Meanwhile, I'm going to start with at the bottom of page 30 is what we're meant to be demonstrating with the joke is the following. Human laughter comes from that which is unforeseen. He continues, an examination, bottom of page 30, an examination of human laughter will show that what causes us to laugh is a sharp and improbable juxtaposition of opposites. When a process is moving in one direction and then suddenly, unexpectedly, it changes to its opposite, laughter is generated. Okay, something is funny where there's a punchline, where there's something which is unexpected. In fact, the more extreme the contrast, the more extreme the tension before the reversal, and the more sudden the snap into the reversal, then the more intense the laughter. Meaning, the more unexpected something is, then the funnier it is. Okay, so it doesn't have to be necessarily a joke, but it could be just something that happens, something which is really unforeseen. You know, the classic, the guy slipping on the banana, he turns around a corner and he slips on the banana, and it's unforeseen and it's just a complete reversal, complete change rapidly, then that is something which invokes laughter. He continues, strangely, this is true even when the events or processes observed are not intrinsically funny. Laughter at the plight of the victim of a practical joke is highly incongruous, yet maybe almost unavoidable. Sometimes you can't help yourself laugh at something. Why is this so? As he continues, the spectacle of a person, a conceited individual strutting along with self-confidence, laid low by a mere banana peel, is not humorous, yet even those rushing to help may not be able to hide their smile. What is the meaning of this strange phenomenon? Why do we laugh at something which is unexpected? Why is it that when something is heading in one direction and all of a sudden it's pulled over to the other direction, then that is something which we find funny? Why? What's the reason? And he continues, the idea here is as follows. Real spiritual laughter is the cosmic response to a real change. We find this expressed in the Psukim, Oz Yamale Sechok Pinu, taken from Tehillim, we say it in Shir Amalas, in fact. Then our mouths will be filled with laughter. Then, but not now. That means at the time of Moshiach. In fact, according to Halacha, we may not laugh with complete abandon during this phase of the world's history, while the pain of exile is still with us. But during and after the transition to redemption, then we will truly be able to laugh. That's Oz Yomale Sechok Pina, which means at the time now, when we are still during the phase of exile, we're during the phase where we are working during the phase where we are actually building something up by ourselves through the hardness and the hardships, so then we don't have that sense of laughter. However, when Moshiach comes, then there's that incongruous feeling of the fact that there's a sudden change, there's a sudden reversal, that everything that seemed to be so difficult and so complicated and such a challenge, we realize was actually building up all the way towards this. That's the laughter that we have at the time of Mashiach. It's not just the laughter of happiness, of joy, but it's the laughter of the unexpected. That's Az Yimale Sechoik Pinum. And amazingly, he continues, Vatischak Leyom Acharon. We say, and this comes from Eshes Chayil, actually, in the book of Mishlei, a woman of valor, an Eshes Chayil, will laugh at the last day. What does that mean? She'll laugh at the last day. Imagine laughing at the day of death. But of course, the transition into eternal life, when the reality is revealed, is that happiest event imaginable. The Eshes Chayil, the woman who's correctly prepared in spiritual strength, will feel that simcha, the joy, and particularly that woman, since she has had that greatness of spirit, which enables her to be a vehicle of birth, she can most deeply understand the happiness of potential life becoming actual, which means that one who laughs at the end of days is also because it's anticipation, it's the simcha, it's the joy of something which is entirely different coming into fruition, where you've been going along one path and now something which is entirely different is happening. That's the joy of laughter. That's where real laughter comes from. That's how that idea is represented in the spiritual world. He continues, the bottom of page 31. Let's look deeper. In the spiritual path, what is the change which generates that exhilaration of laughter? It's the change from ordeal to redemption, and more specifically, from intense crisis to seemingly impossible redemption. When crisis leaves no option but total despair, and at that point deliverance occurs, then laughter is the result. Meaning when a person is about to despair, top of page 32 now, person is about to despair. You know, I've spoken to people who've been in very, very difficult situations in their personal life or in their marriage or with children or that sort of thing. And we've gone through the problem and we've tried and we've thought about solutions, or I've referred them to someone that can help and that sort of thing. And the truth is that there's nothing more beautiful than hearing from them, or being in touch with them in the due course of events, whether it's a week or a month or 2 months or sometimes longer, or even a year. And they'll actually look back and say, do you know, that was the best thing that ever happened to us. We needed to go through that. It was an incredible challenge, incredibly challenging time. But you know what? That made our relationship stronger than ever. That made my relationship with my child stronger. That meant that I had to look for a new job, and I'm so pleased that I had to, in hindsight, looking back. That's the joy of Atischak Liyom Acharon, that joy of turning that crisis into the deliverance. He gives an example of this now in the Torah. When Avram and Sarah give birth to the first child born into the line of the Jewish people, we are taught this secret. Avram was extremely old. Sarah was far beyond childbearing age. The Gemara says that she was intrinsically infertile. She actually had no womb. It was impossible for her to give birth. When these two people, totally devoid of any possibility of having a child, were told that they would in fact have a child, then they laughed. And a child was born. His divinely given name was Yitzchak, which means he will laugh. And is that not the entire story of the Jewish people? We begin where the impossible ends. I wonder actually maybe if this is supposed to say we begin where the possible ends. But the idea being that we, the Jewish people, actually exist in a place that makes no sense, in a place that should not exist. That if you look sensibly at the course of history and you look at the incredibly large empires, whether it's the Romans or the Babylonians or the Medes, or even in more recent history and the British Empire and the Russian Empire, and you look at all of these different things, the Ottoman Empire, and you look through the course of history, then you could place your money on the Jews not being here anymore. The only reason we exist is because we inhabit a space that doesn't really exist. Is because we represent that idea of laughter, that idea of something which doesn't actually make sense, that we shouldn't be here anymore. And that begins right at the root of the Jewish people. The first child born to the Jewish people is that child called Yitzchak. That child called Yitzchak. Is everyone else able to hear? Just checking. Yes? Others are able to hear?
Yeah, I can hear absolutely perfectly
Okay,
clearly.
great. Okay. Um, just
I
checking.
can hear
Thank
too.
Okay, apologies, Belinda. Okay, so that first child that's born to the Jewish people, who is Yitzchak, is born from a marriage which is impossible to have children. And there's no greater laughter than that, because he's overcoming really the realities, overcoming what should be the reality and taking an entirely different direction. And therefore, that's why this is something which is laughter, and that's going to be the future of the Jewish people. He continues, when Yitzchak grows up, he's sacrificed by his father, sacrificed but not sacrificed. In physical terms, he is saved and climbs down from the altar. But the deeper wisdom states, the ashes of Yitzchak, of Isaac, are laid out before me, which means that in spiritual terms he's sacrificed. One aspect of the meaning of this paradox is that Yitzchak can inhabit two worlds. Physically, he is here on this world, but spiritually, he is transcendent. Again, he's been offered up. By the way, this is where the Jewish people really take their spiritual DNA of being able to make those ultimate sacrifices. When we speak about a soldier, Benji Needham, and there have, been many who've made that most incredible sacrifice. Where does that strength of character come from? Where does that courage, where does that dedication to the Jewish people, to Hashem, where does that come from? The answer is ultimately it comes from Yitzchak, because Yitzchak's a person who lives in this world, yet in a spiritual sense, he absolutely transcends this world. And again, his name is the name of laughter. His name is the name that is representing an energy which comes from something that makes no sense. The mystics again refer to his name. He continues, the word Yitzchak comprises Kates and Chai, if you rearrange the letters. Death in life, or better, the next world whilst yet alive. The man whose name means laughter, which denotes his essence, spans two worlds. He lives in the world of ordeal, of challenge, and has about him an aura of the world of deliverance. Is that not indeed the story of the Jewish people? As Rabbi Yaakov Emden said in the introduction to his Siddur, he was a great rabbi who lived in the 1700s. He actually came and visited London, but lived most of his life in Germany. And he writes in the introduction to his Siddur that the greatest miracle, in his opinion, more than the miracles that took place at the splitting of the sea and the 10 plagues, is the survival of the Jewish people throughout everything. We are the nation of laughter. We're the nation that makes no sense. By the way, in truth, Jewish people have always had a good sense of humor, because it has helped us to get through a few of those difficult and dark times. There's always been a kind of wry sense of humor throughout, and there's some jokes which are sort of really sort of conjure up that feeling that they would have had in the deepest and difficult times, certainly sort of from the shtetl in those times, and yet they could laugh and they could always smile because they knew that there was more to it than just the challenges and the difficulties that they were undergoing. Continues at the bottom, page 32. The Rambam explains the birth of a child is a microcosm of this idea, which means if we want to really see this idea somewhere in creation, then birth is the greatest place. The mystery and miracle of human birth reveals the forces of reversal which takes place at the interface between these two worlds. The experience of the mother is perhaps the clearest example of the pathway of ordeal to redemption. Pregnancy proceeds gradually and predictably. Then, like most ordeals and crises, labor occurs abruptly and is incomparable in intensity relative to the preceding months, meaning everything that has happened during those 9 months of pregnancy, of preparation, does not compare to that sharp, intense experience of labor. And of course, I'm only speaking as an observer, and there are many people on the call who will be able to tell us this, from sort of first-hand experience. But it's clear that there is something which is far more intense and takes place during those 9 months. Labor certainly doesn't seem to be a life-giving experience. If one had no knowledge of human physiology and birth, witnessed labor for the first time, he'd be convinced this was a disaster. At the height of labor, when superficially all looks worst, then a child is born. And only then does it become apparent that the entire process was birth and not the opposite. And sometimes you speak to couples. I spoke to a couple the other week who said literally they would rushed her in for an emergency cesarean, and at that moment, at that point, then the baby started coming out, and then the baby was delivered all of a sudden. So there can be the greatest crisis, and out of that comes the greatest source of blessing and of life. More deeply, the experience of the child, he continues, teaches our principle. The unborn child lives in a medium where it's perfectly adapted. It's submerged in liquid with a blood circulation and other details of its physiology specific to the intrauterine environment, meaning it's made to live in the womb. Its lungs are collapsed and non-functional. Blood bypasses the lungs. The heart has openings between its chambers, unlike an adult heart. In short, many of its features are radically different from those of a person already born. But more than this, those features are life-sustaining in that environment. That's what keeps the baby alive. And they'd be lethal in this one, in the world that we live in. And the features which are needed to sustain life here would be lethal over there in the womb. Truly a situation of opposites. Incredible miracle. Then birth begins. A child perfectly adapted to one set of conditions is thrust into another, where death must be only minutes away. This child has only the opposite of what it needs to survive. How is the child going to survive if its entire body is suited to a life in the womb, not to a life outside of it? And miraculously, within a few critical minutes, everything reverses. What is closed opens, and what is open closes, states the Gemara, almost instantaneously. The lungs open and breathe. Blood is simultaneously routed to the lungs. Blood pouring out of the umbilical vessels is mysteriously arrested. It's stopped as they powerfully constrict, and suddenly a child is alive in this world and perfectly adapted to it. It's an incredible thing. Really, really incredible. And I remember, hearing those first cries, which tells you that the child has breathed and that the child is healthy, is you can't compare. You cannot compare anything to that. And you think about the processes that have gone on, that, as he says, that the body which is entirely, completely suited to life in the womb, in one fell swoop, now it becomes something which is absolutely different. All of a sudden is now adapted to living outside of the womb. It's incredible. Continues, birth is the symbol of all transitions. It teaches us to be sensitive in understanding of them. The Rambam quotes this phenomenon to illustrate a firm root of our faith, that there is a transition from this world to the next. Although on this side of the great divide we perceive only a change from life to death, we can begin to understand more deeply the fundamental of faith, that death leads, in fact, to life on the other side of that divide. The reversals miraculously begin. Vatischak liyom acharon. She laughs at the last day, which means if we can understand and appreciate, which we do, that incredible transition from birth to life, then we can also realize there is another amazing reversal and transition, which is from life to life in the next world as well. And that's also a life which we cannot understand, just as the child in the womb would not be able to understand how they would be able to survive. And we cannot understand what it means because we're not suited to that and we're not adapted to that. But that also is vatischak. All of that is symbolized. That's what laughter symbolizes. It's the transition, it's the reversal, it's the thing which doesn't make sense at the moment. Yet when we experience it, then we can truly understand and appreciate. And that's the symbol, that's the joy that comes from that reversal and that deliverance. We will stop there.